What's up, guys? So today is the 8th of April, 2017. Today is Saturn Day, so that would be Saturday. I'm now going to go over the next installment of Mercury Retrograde, which will begin on Monday, which is MoonDay, and that will be the exact date of the 10th of April, 2017. As some people who may have caught I would say it's really sporadic, definitely showcasing Saturn and Sagittarius at its finest, my weekly horoscope that I just posted the other day. I obviously had some issues with my software, and I was lagging because of illness and all that from the previous week, so I kind of just decided to make it up to people by going beyond a week. But unfortunately, due to me overlooking something with my overzealous attitude, I failed to notice that Mercury went retrograde in the midst of my weekly transit. So, I'm not saying that all those themes that I was talking about aren't going to play into it, but there's definitely a layer to it that I missed. So I just wrote down some of my notes here just to make sure I don't miss anything. So today is Saturn Day, as I said, the 8th. We have Mercury going stationary in Taurus today at 4 degrees. Then I assumed that it was going retrograde on Sunday, which would be tomorrow. So Sunday, the 9th, we actually still have it stationary. It'll actually be on MoonDay, Monday, the 10th, as I said, of April 2017, when Mercury will go retrograde, and the exact time I put down was 4:14 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. That's obviously my time zone, so that's in how I go off my calculations and how I do this. So my particular method is obviously the residual themes of, or the aspect of kind of chemistry that's going on at the moment of an actual transit. So meaning when a planet goes direct, when a planet goes retrograde, vice versa, or when it goes into a new sign, it has its own cosmic fingerprint, meaning that the moment, it's a snapshot in the moment of when that actually went retrograde for Mercury. Other aspects, especially generational in particular, are going to have a overall theme among the retrograde events that will transpire. So I noted that Mercury will be in the 8th house. I'll actually just kind of reference my... Alright, Mercury will be in the 8th house, along with Uranus, Eris, and the Sun. So the 8th house has to do with death, disease, mutual resources, economics, money, investments, and inheritance. So I'm obviously going to stem off of a lot more than just the basic kind of translation for a natal kind of perspective, horoscope-wise. It'd be more mundane because the 8th house is about a lot of the collective resources. So the opposition of that would obviously be the 2nd house, which again, the two things that those have in common would be resources, monetary wealth, economics, and physiological resources in general, along with you being able to trust people, so agreements and that sort of thing that would go into that. So that kind of plays into the investments and mutual resources, etc., etc. So the planets that are in the 2nd house at this moment, obviously because Mercury is at 4 degrees of Taurus, it's nowhere near that stellium now that is of the Sun, Eris, and Uranus. So those three in particular are the ones that will be attributed to the planets that are in the 2nd house, because they're in opposition with Jupiter in Libra, which is still retrograde, by the way, and it'll be conjunct to the Moon on Monday. So that's also another thing to take into account. The Moon is the most significant planet aspect of that day because the Lord Dios of the day is the Moon. So the fact that the Moon is squaring with, is in this T-square with Pluto, Uranus, and Jupiter is going to emphasize this even more. Obviously the Moon having to do with people's emotions and natural reactions and instincts. That's obviously going to play a lot into some of the events that will transpire, the themes that will start to surface that have directly to do with this Mercury retrograde. Okay, so another thing I'd like to point out, since the 8th house is where Mercury is at the moment it goes retrograde, the ruler of that house obviously is Pluto. Pluto, again, has to do with those themes that I mentioned, the death, disease, mutual resources, investments, inheritance, etc. Power. So Pluto currently at this moment is in the 5th house of self. So you see how this plays into the Sun, Eris, and Uranus all being conjunct as well. and being right there in the same house with the 8th house, this is kind of reinforcing the themes that I'm going to go over now. So the 5th house represents the self. It also represents leisure, romance, children, projects, creativity, and self-expression. So obviously Pluto having to do a lot with death or transformation or change. This in particular would have to do with a lot of the modes or the mundane kind of representations of Mercury, which would be communication, transportation, or just being able to articulate yourself through publishing or whatever, or even like through YouTube or through online facets as well. Because that makes me think of how there's that huge scandal going on with YouTube right now, and some of the monetization with all the YouTube channels. But anyway, so obviously Pluto being in the 5th house of self-expression. Then I would like to note too, we have to take into account the accomplices of Mercury in this moment. So when I say accomplices, that would mean any of the other planets that are in the same house as Mercury in the moment that it goes retrograde. So its accomplices, as I already mentioned, are Uranus in Aries, Eris in Aries, and the Sun in Aries. So those are going to be a lot of the themes going on. So obviously Uranus has to do with abnormality, antisocial tendencies, deviant behavior, criminal kind of things, going against the grain, that sort of thing. Things out of your control, chaos. Definitely chaos. And then obviously Eris has to do with... Eris has multiple different facets, but it definitely has to do with the underlying problems that have not been addressed. And while it's conjunct with Uranus, it just emulates a lot of the Uranus in Aries qualities. So deviant, malicious, criminal behavior, violence, loose cannon, kind of war tactics, guerrilla warfare, causing pain or injury to others, or utilizing or jeopardizing people's security for personal gain, that sort of thing. So then we have obviously the Sun, which represents the self, and that's pretty self-explanatory with that. So those are the accomplices with Mercury in this time. So a lot of the things that will either be channeled through Mercury facets, which would be communication, transportation, that sort of thing, or anything that has to do with the 3rd house. So immediate neighborhoods, that sort of your immediate kind of environment and demographics are going to be channeled through this deviant, criminal, malicious kind of. I'm trying to say this as like objectively as I can, but the first thing that keeps coming to my mind is terrorism, terrorist activities, rioting, like that Antifa, whatever, the anti-fascist people. Those are the things I'm thinking of. It just full out, all scale, like doing things behind people's backs. So when I said guerrilla warfare, that in particular as well. So as we go on here, the only indirect accomplice to this, which means that some the planets that are aspecting Mercury at this moment, not the other planets in the 8th house, but just Mercury, we have a quincunx with Lilith and Sagittarius. And Lilith and Sagittarius, again, is in the 3rd house on the IC. So the fact that the ruler of the 3rd house in this moment is actually Scorpio reinforces the death kind of signature that will then go into play with a lot of this Mercury retrograde time. Obviously, a lot of people are turned off by the superstition or the stigma that Mercury retrograde insinuates death. But as I proved last year, and I don't even have to go on a elongated speech proving otherwise. The accomplice ruler house, Scorpio, is associated with death. Mercury is in the death house, with two planets that have been in conjunct for a while that are directly attributed to deaths. The Uranus-Pluto square, hello. Okay, so then the self being involved in that obviously is another facet of the death signature. Just to beat my point into the ground even further, if we looked at this, obviously this is a Palladius kind of mapping that I have here, but if we were to take ancient or medieval rulers into account, Saturn, which is attributed to death, is actually in the 4th house of death, which is basically you're going back from which you came. So what comes up must go down kind of thing. The fourth house is essentially the Cancerian house where you come from the womb and that's where you will go back. Soul will return, that sort of thing. So the fact that Saturn's actually in that house and it's in a grand trine with the North Node and with Uranus just re-emphasizes that even more so. Okay, so then overall, the Mercury retrograde themes by aspects at the moment, the main aspect pattern or the major aspect pattern that's going on at this present moment that is most concerning is obviously what I've already mentioned. The Uranus, Pluto, Jupiter, T-square. But now we have the moon conjunct with Jupiter, and then we also have Eris and the sun conjunct with Uranus. So Eris and the sun are facets of the individual. The moon is facets of the collective, the feeling of the society or the community at large, and then Pluto obviously being Pluto in the house of the fifth house would have to do with the self as well. So there's going to be a lot of direct attacks on the self, either mentally, physically, that sort of thing. And it's going to be directly to do with transportation or through communications. So mentally or reputation-wise, because also Saturn being in the fourth house, Saturn has to do with reputation, so it could be also the death of reputation. So people's reputations in particular could be in jeopardy at this point. There could be basically things that come out about people, I mean that's typical for Mercury retrograde anyway, that completely demoralize them or dehumanize them or even ruin their entire credibility overall. And then the physiological standpoint, which is more or less what I'm concerned with, would have to do with the collective being a casualty to a lot of random malicious, intentional acts of violence. And with us having Neptune on the descendant, actually almost exactly on the descendant line, that just emphasizes the collective being essentially the casualty in all of this. Us having Chiron and Venus as well in the seventh house just reinforces that others is going to be the weak ones or the ones that are going to be basically utilized or abused in this situation with all this malicious criminal intended acts. And also another thing to keep in mind too, because I've warned people about Lilith and Sagittarius throughout these last couple months now actually. With Lilith and Sagittarius, it's on the IC in the third house. The third house obviously represents transportation communication, so I would assume that there would be some sort of intended, like, orchestrated act to take lives, kill people in transit. That could be buses, trains, planes, etc. Or just mass casualties with transportation in general. Also, this might be this would be prime for some of those quote-unquote rebel fighters to be showcasing and uploading and demonstrating their rebel fightingness stuff on the internet again, as they've been doing for quite some time now, especially on 4chan and other things, other places where they don't censor those sorts of things. This will also give Pluto and Capricorn more of a justification to continue to censor online content as well. This will also feed into Pluto and Capricorn facets trying to find a way to crack down on the collective or the individual in general for the sake of everybody's safety. So this is definitely a double-edged sword, as per usual with these sorts of things. So Lilith and Sagittarius has a semi-square to Eris, has a quincunx to Mercury, and has a trine to Venus. So that would be, the trine to Venus would mean that the malicious acts are going to essentially take lives of other people. It being semi-square to Eris means that there's going to be there's going to be blood spilled on both sides of the spectrum, regardless if it's the malicious or the deviant or the criminal kind of individual, as well as the intended target sort of thing. And then obviously the quincunx with Mercury is that due to the debilitated kind of mental processes with Mercury being retrograde, the typical kind of, fog or being unable to be calculative and thorough with those sorts of things is going to be the perfect recipe and prey for Lilith and Sagittarius to basically cause havoc and disrupt people's lives and kill people specifically. Because again, this Mercury retrograde is starting in the 8th house, and the fact that the sun is there too just reemphasizes the death thing. And again, I mentioned Pluto being in the 5th house of South, which represents the death thing, and then also Saturn being in the 4th house, which represents the death thing. And yeah, so yeah. Yep. And technically, unless I'm having a mental fog here for a second, this will all be happening right around a full moon. Lovely. So the full moon kind of themes will also be attributed to this. So, just to recap, this starts on the 10th, which is Monday. The end of this mayhem will be on the 2nd of May. And that is, what day is that? Tuesday, the 2nd of May. Okay. So, just because it is Aries season, and just because a lot of this is going to have a huge, overwhelming, very, almost terrifying theme of Aries, I would definitely say that everything will calm down more or less once it hits maybe the 3rd. The 3rd of May. Even though it'll be direct by then. Yeah. And then also, by the way, all of the deaths by transit or like some of the casualties I've mentioned per se, like on the roads or on the highways and stuff, that will again replay because we're gonna go back through the same themes that I was emphasizing on with all those deaths and hazardous kind of travel things in particular, and it'll be more head-on collisions and more fatalities. Definitely fatalities. Fatalities cannot be overemphasized in this case. Like this is if you caught the end of, if you actually are an avid subscriber and you watch a lot of my videos, a few videos back I mentioned during one of those fatalistic kind of videos I did, I said I'm very against there being automated cars that are run by computers, because think of when Mercury retrograde happens, and I said worst case scenario, could you imagine during Aries season Mercury retrograde while Uranus is still in Aries? I actually said that without even thinking or paying attention to the actual transits, because I used to try to keep up, ahead of time with transit patterns going on, like most astrologers do. But I get so fixated and so anxious and worked up on what's to come that I'm not even living in the moment anymore. So I've been trying to curb on that, or at least find a happy medium. So I actually was not even aware that Mercury was going to go retrograde in Aries during that, when I made that video. So that was just totally off my head. So I said that, and then as I was doing my weekly forecast, I realized that that's happening, and I was just like, wow. And so some of the fatalistic things that I've been really concerned about in recent times, this is going to be that times 2, times 3 even. It's intense. I'm not saying this to scare people. I'm just legitimately making this known. So what would be my constructive advice for this, instead of just being scared and putting your head in the sand? First and foremost, unlike what I've done, I actually planned on going on a trip soon, right in the midst of this. I did hesitate to not go right away in the beginning of April, which that might actually save me. But I would rethink maybe your major mainstream kind of transportation things, so like flights and stuff like that. Remember always too, the Titanic did sink during a Mercury retrograde, so there's that. If there's anything that seems to be going awry or malfunctioning or anything like that, or if you're getting any kind of instinctual feelings or anything, because remember the moon is also going to be involved in a lot of these aspects as well. If you feel some sort of instinct to not do something, especially really tune into that Pluto in the 5th house for yourself. Pluto represents a lot of your instincts and your survival. If you feel like something's not right, don't go. Don't do it. If I would personally, for me, I would avoid traveling on malefic days, specifically Mars Day in particular. And for the terrorist thing, I would just avoid what would be a traditional public or, ideal target for that sorts of things. I'm getting this huge, emphasis on terrorism. I know that all those aspects will play into casualties with, transportation and stuff like that, and semi-crashes and, public transits and, buses and stuff like that. But I'm feeling more anxious and more tuned in on terrorist attack things. So take that as you will. I'm just going to go. If you have any questions, feel free to comment below. I will gladly emphasize on anything else or fill in any other questions in particular about Mercury retrograde for this time frame. Alright. And if anybody wants a calendar breakdown or any kind of personal readings or how Mercury retrograde in particular will be affecting you, you're more than welcome to contact me at rayreinharts@gmail.com, and I can just do a really quick progressive kind of reading for you. I can either do a chart or we can do a consultation. So just let me know. Alright.